It's time for Security Now, episode 242. Steve Gibson is here with information about critical updates from both Microsoft and Apple. Good news for Gmail users about security, and a warning for U.S. nudists. It's all coming up with Security Now next.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust. This is Twit.
Audio bandwidth for Security Now is provided by AOL Music and Spinner.com, where you can get free MP3s, exclusive interviews, and more. Video bandwidth for Security Now is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com. This is Security Now with Steve Gibson, episode 242 for April 1st, 2010. Your questions, Steve's answers, number 89. Security Now is brought to you by GoToAssist Express, the easy way to provide instant tech support to your customers remotely. Support smarter with GoToAssist Express. For a free 30-day trial, go to gotoassist.com/security. And by Audible.com. To download a free audiobook of your choice, go to audiblepodcast.com/securitynow. It's time for Security Now, the show that covers everything you need to know about keeping yourself safe online. I hope my wife's listening today. Episode 242, a question and answer episode with Mr. Steve Gibson or grc.com. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Leo. Great to be back with you again, as always.
Starting a little late today because we had a crisis at the Laporte household, Casa Laporta. Jennifer got an email, a panicky email from her gardener. Saying he's actually building some raised beds for us. Really nice guy. We met with him, and he sent us a bid via email, and so they're in email contact. And the email came and said it was kind of puzzling because it was a little ungrammatical and strangely capitalized, and it was signed with his last name, not his first name, and it said that he was in England and he'd been robbed at gunpoint and he'd lost his passport and all his billfold and all his money, and could we please send him $3,279 to cover his hotel bill so he could come home.
Wow, that's a lot of money to ask for.
Yes, considering we barely know the guy. But
yeah.
Jennifer, of course, said to me, well, this is about what we owe him for the raised beds, and so I'm going to send him the money. And I said, whoa! Have you learned nothing from me? So I'm going to make her listen to this show from now on. But
well, it's funny, too, because I just this morning, when I was running through the mailbag and sort of catching myself up on various newsletters talking about security things that have happened, I ran across exactly this report. That is, that this is what's going on, is that people are, bad guys, when they break into someone's email account, they rummage around in their inbox and outbox for any clues about where they're physically located. Then that gives them some context for emailing money requests to people that this person whose account they've broken into knows. So that it's exactly what happened to Jennifer. Is now something that is going on, is becoming a widespread hack because it's social engineering, and of course we've talked about that often. So it's using some sort of break-in to get into the account, then social engineering in order to trick, innocent bystanders who know the person whose account's been hacked into giving them some money. And then they make it sound believable, right? Because by reading reading the history of email, they can figure out who the people are, what's their relationship, where they create some context for themselves. So,
so it's very credible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although still misspelled.
And unfortunately, something like Gmail, where you get to, by design, you get to retain all of the communications that you've had. Well, think about that. Over the years, how much accumulates, and if you were to get into someone's Gmail account, if you spend enough time, you can pretty much assemble a person's life and really generate some context for creating believable social hacking.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't sure. I was trying to figure it out. His email came from his AT&T account, and I thought either he's been hacked or, as you say, his email's been hacked. I think where most of this happens these days, We were just reading about the French hacker who said he hacked Twitter, and he said it's not really a hack. He guessed the secret questions. That seems to be the soft underbelly of security right now, is there's those secret questions. My suggestion is to do what I do, which is lie. So it says, what's the name of your first girlfriend? And I put the name of my first dog in there, something like that, you know? Because especially, you know, nowadays, you can find out a lot about people just scouring around online. All you need to get those answers to those secret questions often, and they'll give you a new password.
Yeah.
All right, that's my little security update. Let's get to yours.
So it's April 1st, April Fool's Day. I'm not pulling any April Fool's Day jokes.
Let's state that.
So this is straight up security now.
I hate April Fools because you never know what to believe.
Yeah.
So there's nothing in this show from Sloof Flurpa or whatever. You know, Dvorak always does the column that quotes a press agent named Slurpa Loof or something like that. No, nothing. This is anything you hear here is real, right?
Just look elsewhere for your April Fools.
We do have some great questions and answers. And before we get started, let me just quickly welcome Citrix back to the show. Yeah, the quarter ended, and we thought, oh no, we haven't had Citrix ad in a couple of weeks, but a new quarter has begun on this first day of April, and yay. So is Citrix. We love these guys, and especially this product for this show, GoToAssist Express. I've been using GoToAssist since the Screensavers days. We actually used it to help people on the TV show. We didn't use it a lot, but we had tried it, and it was really cool because it lets you, fix the computer. Now, that was almost 8 or 9 years ago now. Since then, they have really, this product has gotten faster, better, just superb. So, of course, it's from Citrix. They're always doing the R&D to make their stuff better. So here's the deal. You get the great remote access backbone that Citrix provides. High speed, 128-bit SSL, 24/7 support. But it's tuned for the IT and support professional. So you get a support call. I could have done this with Jennifer. I probably will do it with the gardener. He doesn't have to have it installed, Mac or Windows, by the way. So I don't even have to say, well, oh, you're on Windows. No, any operating system. I just sent him a link. And he clicks on it, and it installs within 30 seconds. It's very quick GoToAssist. And now I can fix anything in his computer. I can see what operating system is running. I can see what security software is running, any programs running in the background. I can copy files from my computer to his. So if there's a malware bytes or something I want to copy over, or a Windows update I want to copy over, easy to do, and then run it. And while it's running, or a scan is running, or an install is running, I can go to another computer, another computer, up to 8 different sessions simultaneously. Unattended access with their approval as well. There's just so many reasons to try it. I want you to try it free for 30 days right now. Go to gotoassist.com/security. gotoassist.com/security. Try it free for 30 days. If you're in the support business, this is a must-have tool for you. gotoassist.com/security. We thank them so much for their support of Security Now. Steve Gibson, we have, I'm sure, a few things to talk about in the security
there's some
news
in the security world, and I just couldn't stop reading my mailbag this morning. I kept reading them, and I was like, oh, okay, we got to have that one, and so we ended up with 12. So
that's fine.
We're back to a dozen, but some of them are quick and just notes and comments and things. So, but lots of really good stuff. Let's see. People may have noticed by the time they're hearing this that there was an out-of-cycle patch from Microsoft. We discussed several weeks ago whether there might be, and I was guessing back then that's like, this is so bad. I don't know if Microsoft can wait until the second Tuesday of April. And sure enough, they chose not to. This was the IEpeers.dll problem, which was a 0-day flaw, which affected IE6 and IE7, but not IE8. So it turns out that it was being extremely heavily used on the internet, and Microsoft decided, we can't responsibly wait until, well, it would be another 2 weeks from now till April 13th. So they pushed out what is essentially their cumulative update for IE, which covers all from IE 5.1 through IE 8. So they fixed another 9 vulnerabilities while they were at it. So That happened on the 30th was when that became available. So people may notice their little Windows Update yellow shield in the toolbar and think, wait a minute, what's going on? Well, that's the story. So I'm glad Microsoft did this. They really had no choice, because this was a typical, what we're seeing now, so-called drive-by web vulnerability, where just getting someone to bring up a web page would allow malicious code to be run in your machine. So once again, that's been fixed. Also, when I turned on my Mac, which I do once a week for the show, because that's where I run Skype, I got news of an update, and it's like, oh, sure enough. Well, the fun thing was iTunes was being brought up to version 9.1
for the
iPad. Specifically to sync with my forthcoming iPad, which currently seems to be stuck in Louisville. I was saying to you before we began recording that it it bounced through a couple cities in China, then briefly seemed to be in Louisville for customs clearance, then went up to Anchorage, Alaska, spent the night there, then came back to Louisville, which is where it currently is. So
I remember this happening with my 3GS as well. It's pretty funny.
Yeah. So and you're tracking yours as well. So and I was thinking briefly that maybe if it's nearby, I'll be able to get it sooner. But I guess no. They're like all set up to deliver on Saturday.
In fact, I talked to somebody whose a friend is a kind of a high-end delivery guy for UPS. I can't remember the town, and he has lined up 100 Saturday deliveries of something. Wow. So I think it's pretty. They do this all the time. If you look at your tracking, it will say exception or something like that, and held. And then it'll be, but it's funny because people get all freaked out thinking, oh no, this is something bad has happened, because maybe you saw there was a news story saying a company had sued and asked the ITC to hold the iPad back. And that's not what's going on. This is normal. The Apple says to the UPS folks, hold this for Saturday delivery.
Well, and it's good too that they're not, that they're ahead of the game in terms of delivery, because how upset would we be, Leo, if it didn't actually come on Saturday?
Yeah, no, exactly.
It's like, wait a minute, I would have done store pickup if I didn't think I was really going to get it on Saturday. So
what's fascinating is this whole drop ship from China thing. If you order a cable from Apple, you really don't even buy it from Apple. A third party makes it, delivers it, and ships it, and Apple never even sees it. And I think that this is kind of the very interesting kind of just-in-time way that we work nowadays. So it's not shipped from Apple. It's not shipped from an Apple store. It's shipped from the factory in Shenzhen, China.
Yep, that's exactly where mine originated.
Yeah.
So also OS X got a big update. I mean, the iTunes update was 100+ meg, like I think it was 101 megabytes for syncing with the iPad, and also to support the new iBooks store, both of those features. And OS X has now moved to 10.6.3.
This was a big update.
Yes, 436 megs. And as this thing was downloading, I was thinking, where would we all be if 436 megs wasn't just something we could casually do? It's like, oh, fine, update now.
That's half a gig. It's like a whole new operating system. That's huge. It is the largest. I'm told now the most security patches Apple has ever shipped in history. I mean, by like order of 2. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and they didn't patch little things. They said, I just give them a whole new one.
Right. Yeah, easier to do that.
Yeah, exactly. I also did want to mention, speaking of people getting their email accounts hacked, and specifically Google being a typical target, as of a couple days ago, Google has added a new feature to Gmail, which our users and our listeners may want to look out for. If you log into your Gmail box and notice a red bar, sort of a banner running across the top of your inbox, that's a new feature where Google will alert you to what it considers might be suspicious activity on your account. From the Google blog talking about this, they said, now, I'm quoting, now, if it looks like something unusual is going on with your account, we'll alert you by posting a warning message saying, warning, we believe your account was last accessed from ... along, well, I'm going to fill that in, along with the geographic region that we can best associate with the access. Clicking through that banner, and there's like a link as part of it, will deliver a log of your prior logon dates, times, and IP addresses. So, and apparently, further elsewhere I was reading that essentially their logic is if you log in from one country and then a few hours later log in from another, where it's unlikely that you've actually, made the journey in that period of time, they'll say, okay, hold on a second. And maybe, and I imagine that's a relatively lax period of time. Basically, if you appear to be country hopping, they'll just say, are you really? Or, is this something bad? So that's a nice feature. I'm glad that they've added that. And I think it's the kind of thing I was thinking, well, how many users are going to understand how to, like what this log means of their prior logons? Well, certainly our listeners will.
Oh, yeah.
And getting a list of IP addresses would be very cool. So I think that'll be a nice feature.
And you can log that other machine out, which I think is nice.
Uh-huh.
You could say, I don't know who that is, but get them off my...
Well, and then you're immediately going to want to change your username and password and so forth, making sure that there's nothing evil in your machine that might be watching you do that.
I think this is so great. I mean, this is just brilliant. I mean, I'm so glad they're doing this.
It's being proactive, which I think is really good. And there was an interesting study by an outfit we've talked about a couple times, an outfit called Beyond Trust. They did a study to look at to retrospectively look at what admin rights would have done for Windows 7 since it had been created in the past. They determined that of the 190 vulnerabilities published by Microsoft last year in 2009, restricting administrator rights for users. So if users were like doing what we should, which we all sort of know we should, but it's a pain, so some of us don't, running as a normal rights user and only using admin account rights when you're installing software and so forth, all vulnerabilities in Microsoft Office would have been avoided.
Whoa.
All vulnerabilities in IE8 would have been avoided. 94% of all vulnerabilities in all other versions of IE would have been prevented.
It's kind of amazing.
I know. And 64% of all other Windows vulnerabilities. So would have been bypassed, would have not been a problem.
Jeez.
So, I'm thinking, okay, it's annoying to do that, but boy, what a benefit. So I would say, especially to people who, for whatever reason, have a history of getting themselves infected.
Like Jennifer and my mom.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, frankly, we've spoken, you and I, Leo, we're very careful, knock on wood. It's funny because somebody, in fact, in one of our Q&As today, they made a comment. They wanted to give me a link, and they said, Steve, I know how, you're reluctant to click on links in email. And I said, no, not reluctant.
I don't.
No force on earth could make me click on a link in email. So reluctant doesn't begin to
really reluctant
characterize it.
It's uncooperative.
I just won't. I can't think of a good reason to ever to do that. So
let me ask you this though, because it was my understanding, we've kind of gone back and forth on this, that in current versions of OS 10 and Windows 7, that even if you're an administrative user, you still have to kind of explicitly say, I want to do this. You don't have to enter the password, but you still have to say, yes, I know what I'm doing here, right?
You have to you have to do the user account control.
So you're not really, you don't have full administrative privileges just kind of out of the box, which means no virus would either, even if you're logged in as an administrator. That's what puzzles me. I know in older versions of Windows that's true.
Yeah, I think I'm going to probably follow this down because I'm curious. I mean, I'd like to give our listeners a solid understanding of what this means because
I had been saying all along, be a limited user. Do not be a full user. You'll be safer. Yes, it's a pain. You have to. But then it was my understanding that the new, like starting with Vista, I think, and OS 10.
Well, and remember, because the way Vista worked was when you logged in, you were given a pair of accounts. There was actually a dual login. And so you were running with restricted rights normally.
Right.
And then when you said, when you did the UAC
it would elevate you.
Elevation,
right.
It would actually switch over to an admin set of credentials that allowed you to proceed with that operation. So you're right. I need to look more closely at their report and understand why that isn't enough, because they're saying that isn't enough, that you need to actually be a limited user who doesn't presumably who doesn't have the option of like installing device drivers and installing stuff. But you'd think, okay, well, does that mean that this the whole UAC dialogue is being ineffective, or maybe they're just assuming people click and say yes all the time.
That's probably. I mean, yes. If you escalate, of course, or elevate, then of course you're going to have a problem, and that's probably true. That maybe people just go, yeah, whatever. Just do it.
Well, I did have an interesting news flash, not surprisingly about Spinrite version 6. It's been approved for use by the U.S. Army.
Congratulations. What does that mean?
I don't know. John Galliano, looks like, I think that's how I would say his name. He said, Steve, thank you for your wonderful product, Spinrite. I've used your product for many years now, and I'm such a believer in Spinrite that I recently submitted the product for approval Army-wide by IT specialists, which is a group, I guess, within the Army, because he capitalizes it. He says, it passed a tough evaluation with ease. I look forward to purchasing 4 copies for my unit's use. So he'd be getting a site license by purchasing 4 copies. He says, thanks to you and Leo Laporte for your 5 wonderful years of Security Now. Your netcast is by far, hands down, the best one out there. Congratulations on the award.
Yay.
So that's very cool. Spinrite formally, and he sent me a PDF, which I opened very carefully because it was an attachment to email, but I knew where it came from in this case. And it says, under factors, it says recommendation, approve, and it said background. Gibson Research Corporation Spinrite, GRC Spinrite 6.0 is a software program for scanning magnetic data storage devices such as, this is like an official Army document that I'm reading, such as hard disks, recovering data, and refreshing their surfaces. Spinrite tests the data surfaces of read-write magnetic disks, including IDE, SATA, USB, floppy, zip, and others, by analyzing their contents, and will refresh magnetic disk surfaces to allow them to operate more reliably. Spinrite attempts to recover data from hard disks with damaged portions that may not be readable via the operating system or other utilities. And then under facts, that was background. Under facts, it says, Spinrite will be utilized on machines, I don't know really what this means, but it says, not connected to the land war net to aid in the troubleshooting, repair of hard drives, and recovery of data from failed hard drives.
Wow.
For machines connected to the land war net, Spinrite will be utilized in a preventative maintenance mode only. So, of course, that's good because you could run Spinrite on those drives to keep them from failing, which Spinrite really does a good job at. And then whatever the land war net is, I guess they take the machine off of that if they want to run Spinrite in a post-failure data recovery, bring the drive back to life mode. So anyway, that's very cool.
We're going to take a little break. Then we have 12 questions. Some great stuff, too, in here
Yes.
from you, the listeners to this show, and viewers, too, by the way. Steve, starting with this week, we're going to have video of this show available on iTunes and on YouTube. So people who want to watch Steve gesticulate can do so. Every once in a while, I know you're not watching the video, but every once in a while, your hands get really big as you gesticulate.
Oh, like I go in front of the camera.
Exactly, and it's wonderful. It's just hysterical. So if you have never seen Steve work, and people do tell me, I mean, you would say this is a classic example of a Talking Heads program where there's no visuals, but
right.
people say it really is easier to understand when they're watching you. There's just something, it's like real communication. It's like talking with somebody. And so if you haven't watched the video, give it a try. It is on iTunes. You can subscribe in our Twit artist page, and also the Zune store. It's there, the Zune Marketplace, and on YouTube as well.
If you're not getting sufficient value from your 5 megabit download speed, this will really suck
give
up
you a
the
new way to.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that they average about 300 or 400 megabytes.
Punish your ISP for giving you that deal.
It's about as big as the Apple update. But that's exactly why people no longer care. It's just become transparent to people, I think. Hey, let's talk a little bit about Audible.com. Actually, if you have a lot of bandwidth, Audible has a special version of their books, super high quality, CD quality. They call it enhanced. But you can also, they have 5 different types of every book. So if bandwidth is an issue, you can depending on, your tolerance for lower quality audio, you can get a much smaller file. I do the type 4, which is half the size of enhanced. It's like 32 kilobit MP3, I think. Enhanced is 64 kilobit mono MP3, I believe. But the point is, these sound great, and they play back on almost every device, with the one exception being Android devices, and that is coming soon. So what is Audible? It is a bookstore, 70,000 books, great titles, wonderful stuff. I know you're already listening to podcasts. This takes it to the next level at audible.com. Actually, if you go to audiblepodcast.com/security now, you can get the first book free. You sign up for the gold account. First book's free. You cancel at any time, so no cost to you, and you get to keep the book forever. One of the things I like about Audible is that once you buy a book, it's in your library, and you can download it at any time later. Just looking at Shackleton's Way. What a great story this is. Ernest Shackleton, who tried to get to the Antarctic. Their ship got stuck 1,200 miles from civilization, and they basically walked back. Rode a little bit, walked a little bit. It is an amazing story, and this is a new version of the story by an expert on Shackleton, Margaret Morell, and Stephanie Caparel, who is a Wall Street Journal leadership expert. And so this is a focus on this is kind of the leadership lessons of Ernest Shackleton, how he got his men under unbelievably difficult conditions to pull together and saved them all. Shackleton's Way, one of many great books. Now, that's a business book, but if you listen to this show, you probably like sci-fi. I know a lot of you are science fiction fans, as Steve and I are. One of the things Audible's done is really expanded their science fiction section by recording great sci-fi that's never been recorded before in many cases. Classics, brand new ones. Try it. audiblepodcast.com. Pick a book, any book from their 70,000 book collection. Almost all of them are good for 1 credit. The 20th anniversary edition of Ender's Game. There's a classic. audiblepodcast.com/security now. Get it for free when you sign up for the gold account. And we thank Audible so much for supporting Security Now. All right, Steve, I have, if you are ready, a dozen questions. We're going to power through these suckers.
Yay.
Are you ready?
I am.
Question 1 from John Hatfield, Indianapolis, Indiana. He says, no, it's not fixed. I just listened to number 241 last episode, and I was thrilled to hear you bringing up the mouse scroll wheel bug in Firefox, saying it was fixed at 3.6.2. Well, it's been bothering me for several weeks since I upgraded to 3.6. Sadly, I have to report that the problem is not, in fact, fixed, at least for me. I tried turning off Cat Mouse, which is that great program you recommended, and ta-da, the scroll wheel works. So it's a problem with Cat Mouse. He turns it back on, breaks it again. He says, not having the scroll wheel has caused me no end of frustration, but for the interim, until this bug is fixed, I'll be able to scroll by turning off Cat Mouse. I searched Google for it, and until listening to last week, I had no fix for this problem and was prepared to revert back to an older version of Firefox. So thanks, as always, for the great information. Spinrite 6 owner. I've used it 8 to 10 times to recover aging TiVo hard drives. Oh, that's a good use for Spinrite.
I do it often, too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Also, I've been a listener since the 2nd or 3rd episode. Keep up the good work.
Well, I just wanted to report this to our listeners since I had believed that 3.6.2 fixed it. And I have to say, Leo, When you have the experience of that MX Anywhere Logitech mouse with the zero friction scroll wheel, and I would revert to Firefox 3.5 rather than give that up. I mean, it's a sort of a pain to turn cat mouse off and on. Like you'd have to turn off apparently in order to get scrolling, because apparently 362 will do that for you. Although you'd probably have to, the cool thing about cat mouse, just to remind people, is that it sends scroll messages to the window your cursor is over, which is different than the window that is activated, as Microsoft calls it. The topmost window, the one that's kind of lit up with the title bar emphasized. The idea being that it allows you just to scroll anything, any window that the mouse is hovering over. So it's just, scrolling in web pages is certainly important. When you've given the focus to Firefox, any version of Firefox, spinning the wheel will quickly scroll the web page. But it's nice to have cat mouse because it does that universally. But apparently, something in the way Firefox is working is conflicting with cat mouse, such that Firefox doesn't see cat mouse's scroll messages the way it normally sees the wheel scroll messages without cat mouse. So I did want to let people know that apparently, though it works for me, and that's the other thing that's strange. I'm wondering if there may be some difference in add-ons which is causing a problem. If one of the add-ons maybe that John has is responsible for this problem. So I would say to him that it definitely is working for me on several different laptops. It's working for Greg, my tech support guy. Both of us briefly had this experience of it not working, and now it is again. So it could be that there's an add-on conflict. I mean, I'm trying to think what's the difference between my version of Firefox 362 and John's, and certainly the collection of add-ons that we've chosen to run could be different between those two. So maybe that's it. Yeah. Anyway, if I didn't have it, if it didn't work like that, I'd be back at 3.5. I just kind of camp there for a while and wait for 3.6 to get it fixed. So
you have to think it's something that cat mouse is doing that maybe is non-standard as opposed to being a Firefox issue, but I don't know.
Well, except it worked under 3.5.
Right.
So
yeah. That's why it's so difficult to debug software in an environment where you have multitasking, multiple processes going on.
And Leo, it's why GRC's news groups with the listeners, I mean, with the audience that we have there, when I was doing the DNS benchmark,
so handy.
I was able to do a version and say, okay, gang, kill it, pound on it, jump on it. And many of the guys, for example, were Linux users who were using Wine, which I wasn't living in, and they said, "Oh, well, this went sideways there." And it's like, okay, I'll go fix that. So I mean, it's just incredibly valuable. But it's no longer the case that if it works for you, it'll work for everyone.
Right.
As a developer, you really do need a large audience to give you the feedback.
And that's why Microsoft does these big betas, right?
Yes.
Question 2 from Trevor Awalt, who wrote to GRC's tech support email about something he noticed. Trevor writes, I'm using Wireshark on that's the old Ether, what was it called? It's a packet sniffer.
Yes.
On the PC, Dell XPS 9000, i7. While doing a DNS benchmark test in order to understand exactly what you were doing, he wanted to sniff your packets.
Yep, he was.
I was just wondering if you'd noticed that in all of your queries, the IP header checksum equals 0. Is that on purpose? Even though this is the case, the DNS servers seem to respond okay. Well, this is interesting. What is that intentional? What happened?
I thought this would maybe something that other of our listeners had seen, and it's a cool and interesting feature. I'm just using, for the DNS benchmark, not doing any fancy raw packet stuff. I'm just using the regular UDP technology, the UDP stack in Windows, and sending out packets. So in this case, although, for example, on the GRC server, where I'm doing all kinds of fancy things, I'm building the packets myself and sending them out through a raw interface. So I am doing things like setting IP header checksums and all that. In this case, running on a regular Windows client, I'm not doing that. So the stack is sending packets down to the NIC, the network interface card, with their IP headers left 0.
Huh.
The reason it's doing that is the NIC has said, we have hardware IP checksums. You don't need to do it. When you think about it, a checksum on a packet is a relatively expensive thing to do because it requires that you essentially scan the entire packet and sum up all of the 16-bit words which occur and apply the standard IP checksumming algorithm. So to do that takes time. So if a new feature of many of the latest NIC hardware is that the NIC chips will do that on the fly. That is, it's impossible to send out a bad IP checksum, and there's no reason you would ever want to, because I mean it would die at the first router that it came to. That anything that checked that for integrity, right, that's what it would look for in order to see that if there was a transmission error. So there's no even tricky, hacky, fun way there's no win in deliberately messing up the checksums in TCP/IP packets. So you can't send out a wrong one. Well, what's interesting is that Wireshark, where Wireshark sticks its little shim to sniff, is right in between the stack and the network interface card. So it's seeing the packets go by with no checksum set. Essentially, the device driver has given Windows permission not to bother. Just do not bother with that. We'll take care of it. So what's cool is that the hardware with 0 overhead does that for the software as the packet is leaving it on its way out the wire. So that's the answer. Yeah.
Wireshark's kind of fun because you actually are looking at the traffic as it's going out, so you see all sorts of interesting stuff there.
And we have a not so fun one about that coming up here.
All right.
Yeah.
Curtis Clark in Sayreville, New Jersey, with question number 4. He wonders about IP network addressing. He says, Steve and Leo, I have a question regarding the difference in IP addresses for my home networking devices. Recently, I purchased a new wireless router for my home. The old router uses that, 192.168.1. whatever IP address distribution. The new one uses 10.0.0. I use a NAS as a local backup. And before you ask, Leo, I use Carbonite for offsite backup. Good combination, actually. And I manually give the NAS a fixed IP address of 192.168.1.20 so I could always get to its web portal using the same destination IP address. Of course, when I switched from the old router using the 192 scheme to the new router using the 10 dot scheme, I noticed I could no longer access the NAT at its IP address, so I switched back to the old 192 dot router and changes the NAS's fixed IP address to 10.0.0.20. Then switched back to the new router. Everything worked, but that made me think, why couldn't I still access the NAS at its original fixed IP of 192.168.1.20 since I was, it was right there sitting on my network? And since I couldn't access it, couldn't this somehow be used for some kind of, access security? Steve?
It's a great question. So he basically changed his network because as he evolved his router, he went to a new router. He changed it from a 192.168 network to a 10 dot network. And he's asking, but the NAS was still set with that fixed address originally, 192.168.1.20. It's like there. So why can't he still get to it? Because it's right there on his network.
Right.
The answer is kind of cool, and it explains how this aspect of networking and masking and submasking works. The idea is that when you have a network, a local area network, whether it's 192.168.1. something or 10. whatever, essentially there is the network address, which is those numbers, and then there's the subnet mask. What the subnet mask does is it specifies which IP addresses are on that local network, and any that are not are assumed to be somewhere else. They're not on the local network. They're elsewhere. And so what happens is, remember that we're always talking about Ethernet networks here. So the actual way packets are addressed is with MAC addresses, which are the actual physical addresses of the interface cards on the Ethernet. The IP addresses are just sort of they're a convenient way for us mapping these IP addresses to the MAC addresses. But it's actually the MAC addresses that it is the actual way packets are sent from point to point. So what happens is, when he was at his computer, which was now in a 10 dot network, where anything beginning with 10 was regarded as on the local area network, and he tried to connect to 192.168.1.20, the routing system in his local computer's network said, does this address begin with 10? If it begins with 10, it's on the LAN. If it doesn't, it's not. And when it saw that it didn't begin with 10, and it literally the part of the subnet mask which has ones in it did not match the numbers of his network, that was the logic used. And so it said, okay, this is not on the LAN, send it to the gateway. And so even though the IP address was physically a device on his network, he'd sort of moved his network out from under it. And so by definition, if it's not local, it's remote. And if it's remote, you send the packet to the gateway, and now it's the gateway's problem. You know, it's sort of like you've discharged your responsibility. It's now the gateway's problem to send it on to wherever it goes. So, you know, that's the end of the mystery. And as for, could this be used as access security? Well, not really, because that device is there on the network. It is at that IP address. And if you made a change to, for example, to your routing table in the computer, where you said this particular IP is local, then that would override this decision, and you could still access it even at a funky IP. So it's there, it's ready to receive traffic, but it's just, at the moment, it's sort of been softly excommunicated, but not really hard excommunicated. You could get to it if you wanted to.
All right, now it's time for some comedy relief. An anonymous listener. Subject line, sunbathing au naturel. Steve, I finally got back to listening to your vitamin D episode. By the way, you know, some flu's been going around, Steve, and I doubled down on my vitamin D. I was worried initially about overdosing. This is not the letter. This is me talking. And I just read that, you know, just sunbathing for 15 minutes is like, whatever it is, 10,000 units or something.
Yeah, I know. Yep.
So I'm taking like 2,500 units, which is probably not, I don't even know if it's therapeutic, but I haven't gotten sick.
Well, I've avoided, I'm getting
I know, you're not making a prescription. You're not a doctor.
No, I'm going to say I've avoided talking about this all the time, but it is really becoming an issue in the news. There was an article last week that talked about where they've actually discovered at the molecular level how T cells, which are our immune system cells, put out a little VDR that I talked about in the podcast, a vitamin D receptor, and require vitamin D in order for the T cells' immune function to activate. And without it, it doesn't. And so they're beginning to understand increasingly how important vitamin D is to things like immune system function.
Interesting.
And there's been like studies that have showed that there was a study with school kids where their incidence of catching the flu, this was between '08 and '09, was nearly cut in half by vitamin D versus a placebo. So it was a double-blind placebo-controlled study that said, that really demonstrated that kids didn't have enough vitamin D, and when they were given some, they got that, like, the incidence of them coming down with the flu was cut nearly in half.
Wow.
And interestingly, asthma nearly by 1/6. That is 1/6 the instances
Holy
of
cow.
asthma versus not.
Holy
So,
cow.
Yeah, I know.
Purely anecdotally, I just haven't been sick since I started taking more vitamin D. It's been great.
This is a security podcast. I want to keep us on that. But
Well, and this has nothing to do with that, except that he was, listening to the fact that you were sunbathing in the nude.
Okay.
As a test to see whether you could get enough vitamin D the natural way.
Right.
He says, I had a friend who used to slew the NSA satellites around in some secret basement facility. And I asked him if it was really possible to read your license plate from outer space with them. He laughed out loud and told me, number 8 font. He said you could look over someone's shoulder and tell what he was reading in a newspaper. They could read down to a font size of 8 points. He said, this was 15 years ago.
Wow.
So being aware of the surveillance laws, I asked, do you guys turn this off when the satellites pass over the U.S.? He said, no. In fact, he said, they knew the location of most of the nudist camps in the country. Sunbathing au naturel has never been the same since. Just a word of warning.
Yeah, Big Brother may be watching, but he probably doesn't want to see what he does.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah, the nudist camps that I've, been aware of anecdotally, never been to one, but I've, they don't look like places where one gets very excited about going there. No.
Here's question 5. Peter Barsson in Sweden says he wants to talk about disposal mail. Steve and Leo, thanks for security down the information you give us. It helps to be safer on the internet. Love the show. And for Leo's sake, if you decide to share this, yada, yada, yada. This was just kind of what I always say, etc. Rush Limbaugh, that's why he created the ditto heads. It's just like, just say ditto, okay? Because mega dittos. Because people just kept saying the same thing over and over. So just say ditto from now on. Anyway, I was thinking about how annoying it is to have to supply an email when you just want to get past a point for getting to the next step in the process, whatever it is you want to do on the net. I discovered disposamail.com. disposamail.com. As I know you don't like to click on links in emails, just Google it.
Huh.
See?
Yeah, I won't click.
Yep. I won't click. Don't ask me. He says, I think it's a really nice solution for just getting past these steps. Furthermore, if you want to get a unique disposable email address, you could just use the GRC password generator, which is awesome. The only thing I'm missing for the disposal mail solution is HTTPS. Thought it might be fun for you to know that I follow the TNO-ESG rule. That is, trust no one except Steve Gibson. Keep the invaluable work up that you and Leo do. Regards, Peter in Sweden. Now, that's a neat thing. Disposamail.
Okay, now this is really sort of odd, but interesting. So, yes, disposamail, disposemail.com. Now, what it is, okay, I'm intrigued by it, but I'm a little frightened by it, too. It is just a galactic email recipient that you don't even have to tell it ahead of time. You don't create an account. You don't log on. You don't identify yourself. Nothing. All you do is, if you are at some random, download site or account creation nonsense, I hate that. I mean, when I built GRC's e-commerce system, I said, I am not going to ask people who want to buy Spinrite to first, you must create an account with GRC. It's like, the things that drive me nuts, I'm not going to ask my own customers to do. That's just bogus. But, I'm sure we're always, I mean, I know I'm always having to give an email address for something where I'm never going to go back there. I'm afraid that they're going to send me an email loop confirmation because they're trying to, harvest email addresses from people, even though I don't want them to do that. So it's like, okay, so wherever you happen to be at one of these sites, you just make something up. I mean, on the spur of the moment. It could just be test. It could be hi mom, anything at disposamail.com. So that site sends email, confirmation, follow-up, click-through loop, whatever it is. It sends it to disposamail.com. Disposamail.com accepts anything from anywhere. It doesn't care.
Right.
So, and I think, my God, how do they handle spam? Because, I've done packet sniffing of my own GRC's SMTP servers, which transact email. And I see servers hook up to GRC and try, Adam at grc.com, Alex at grc.com, Annette at grc.com, and right down through every possible first name there is. And in fact, I created a temporary email address that I realized in order to purchase the iPad, doing exactly this same thing, what we're talking about, and I got spam on it because it wasn't bizarre enough. So this wacky Disposamail, it must just be accepting all the spam that's ever been sent to it, or maybe they do some good RBL stuff, blacklisting SMTP sources so they're not getting too much. So the point is, if you go to Disposamail and put in like test, all you get is a simple little form. It says, what email address would you like to check on stuff from? And so you put in hi mom or whatever. And if they've ever received any email addressed to hi mom at disposamail.com, including everyone else's.
Yes, it'd probably be a good idea not to use something obvious.
Correct. So, and I did. I
just use spam and look at all the.
Try test. Test, I think, has like a nice little set of maybe about 12 things.
Yeah.
And so
it doesn't even check to see if it's you or anything. You're just looking for what did you get with that email address lately.
Yes. And so certainly you would want to use.
There's a lot of spam here, by the way. In fact, it's almost all spam.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
It would have to be. It's collecting it from anything.
Right.
But if you were to put in, 729_37 Ajax 9 Charlie Baker, there's probably not going to be many of those. You can make it up on the fly, and then you just go over and put the same thing into it, and it'll give you your mail that was sent. So with an understanding that it's strange, that it's not private at all, that anybody who puts in the same email address that you put in will see whatever that you were sent. And that's the problem, is you wouldn't, if you were doing something where, a bank was sending you confirming credentials or something, or click this link to, access your account, and you used, doggy breath or something, anybody else who put that in would see the mail that was sent. And I don't know if there's a way to delete it. I didn't notice to see. I guess probably not. Otherwise, people would be deleting each other's email. So
that's why I guess he's suggesting you use perfect paper passwords.
Yes, use a bizarre, absolutely unique
the password generator, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And I would also say don't do it for something sensitive. Do it for, things that are just annoying but don't really, you wouldn't mind it if somebody else saw it, because potentially someone else could. There's no security here, but for what it is, it's wacky, but it's kind of useful.
I would bet that spammers have, or somebody says, or hackers have written scripts that scan through this stuff and are looking for bank passwords and things. So, in fact, I would say this is a very dangerous thing to do for something that you'd want to keep secure.
Yes. Although, again, I don't know how long an email address it could accept, but if you use one of GRC's, perfect passwords, there you've got
pretty unlikely.
You got gazillion bits worth of randomness. I mean, that's what I'm offering at GRC for that reason. So, but again, without your ability to delete it, it's going to be there forever. So you don't want, and you're sending it to somebody else, not to you. So, it is a concern, but I could see myself for clearly non-sensitive things saying, this is easy. I mean, this is better than having to create random temporary password or email accounts.
Chat room tells me there are a number of other services. This is another one that does exactly the same thing. Mailinator. Mailinator.
Cool.
And there's quite a few of them. So if you think about it, it'd be an easy script to write, really.
Yes, it's a no-brainer.
But no-brainer.
I'm not writing one.
No.
It just
you
seems
don't
like
want the responsibility.
I'm not having it on GRC, no.
By the way, the chat room has also sent me an article from CNN a couple of days back. Bob Green, a CNN contributor, writing a story in CNN about getting exactly the same email that my wife Jennifer got this morning from a friend of his who was a famous sports writer. And it's the same. So apparently this is really going around right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So tell Jen that, if nothing else, she's in good company.
Panic not.
Yeah.
Well, she didn't get hacked. It was somebody else, but she's in good company, like, falling for it probably.
Yes.
Question 6, Mark Fink in Baltimore, Maryland. Just listening to Security Now 240, a couple of episodes back, and the question about disabling the microphone. We were talking about how easy it is to disable a camera by taping it over, but the mic still works, and in fact, it doesn't look like you can necessarily disable it very easily. He says, sorry if I'm the millionth person to suggest this. On my Dell M4300 laptop, you could disable it in the BIOS settings. Don't know how common an option this is, but I thought I'd mention it as one place people could look. Thanks for helping to make the world a little safer and more aware. My wife and I and the IT folks at work wish I have never found your podcast. My wife and the IT folks at work wish I'd never found your podcast. Mark Fink, Baltimore, Maryland. So if I disable it in BIOS, does that mean software could turn it back on?
No. Well, okay, maybe ultra-specialized software could turn it back on because it is the BIOS. You're using the keyboard in the BIOS and when you're in the setup mode to change the BIOS. But this is a very good idea. So if you're a person with a laptop who doesn't use your microphone, that is the regular microphone on your laptop, you're not doing teleconferencing and Skype and so forth, or when you do, you're not using the built-in microphone, but you're using a headset, for example. The reason I like this is that in the BIOS, when you turn it off, it disappears to the OS. The OS believes that it's on a laptop with no microphone, that is, with no built-in microphone. It doesn't see it in any way. The hardware, it's removed from the hardware list, and it's just gone.
Well, that's good.
That's a great suggestion. I hadn't thought of it. I wanted to give Mark credit for that and thank him because we don't know that all BIOSes are going to have this, but BIOSes often give you the option of turning like your serial ports on and off. How many of those do you want? Do you want this enabled or not? If you have an option for microphone disabling and you're not a user, by all means, turn it off in the BIOS. It'll just disappear from your operating system, and the OS won't know that it exists at all.
Question 7.
Great idea.
Yeah. Patrick Boyle, Springfield, Missouri, has more forensic suggestions for us. Steve, I just heard last week's episode. Someone was wondering how to block an IP address. You mentioned your buddy Mark Thompson's fixedorbit.com. Thank you for the tool, and boy, do I have some more related tools for you. IP Neighbors, it's www.myipneighbors.com. You can enter an IP address or a domain name. It'll show you all the domains that are hosted at that IP address. Well, that's interesting. Here's one for domaintools.com. Used to be whoes.sc. Domaintools.com. You enter an IP address or a domain name. It shows you the ownership. And whois.net, same thing by IP address, tools.whois.net. So there's some other useful ways of figuring out what's going on in that network.
Yeah, and I thought that our listeners are the kind of people who would appreciate knowing about those other little tools since we're all sleuths.
I put, there's a command line Java program called JWhois that I always put on all my Macs. You do it from the terminal, from the command line, but it's really good at scanning. The problem is finding out from IP address or domain name who owns it is you have to go through a lot of different registrars. And this has a very complete list of registrars. But there are websites like some ones he mentioned that do a very good job too.
Right.
Question number 8. David W. Griffin in Atlanta, Georgia, comments about programming in assembly language. I respect your abilities to program in assembly language, Stephen, but much of the world's software these days is designed for large-scale software for which high-level solutions rather than low-level solutions are the right way to go. Developing large software projects with large staffs and then maintaining them for a decade, it is not a job for which you would select assembly language. Not if you could help it anyway. I'm not sure I agree with that, but software engineering has made little progress toward reusable components, but at least high-level languages have some effect on achieving reliability. Nothing you have said contradicts this. You, after all, are doing small, well-focused applications with a single author. But I thought I'd make the point that much of the world's software today has other design considerations. Enjoy the podcast and your lectures on computer science.
And largely, I completely agree. When I talk about my use of assembly language, I regard it as a personal preference. I'm not pushing it on people. I'm not suggesting that the world would be a better place if people programmed in assembly language. Well, maybe I am, but I completely recognize that that high-level languages are here to stay. That they make much more sense for many applications. It's programmer productivity. I guess the metric that I've seen, which is most compelling, is that no matter what level of language you're programming in, programmers generally produce the same number of lines per day. So if a high-level language line of code does much more than an assembly language line of code, and both programmers are going to be equally productive when measured in lines of code, then it's clear that more functionality is being written per day by someone whose lines of code do more per line because they're using a high-level language. So I have no problem with that. I'm sticking with what I love and like and know and I'm so comfortable with, assembly language, but I have by no means have I been intending to denigrate in any way the value of high-level languages. We wouldn't have nearly as much stuff if we didn't have high-level languages. I would argue maybe we'd have better stuff, but much less of it. So would that be a bad thing? I'm not so sure that'd be a bad thing.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my thinking is you can make assembly look just like a high-level language with macros and probably make it very efficient.
Well, mine is very clean, and I write a lot of it in a day. So, again, it might be a little bit like, the guy who wrote in about Forth, who took exception to my saying, I can't read that. How can anybody read that? Nobody can read that. And he said, I can read that.
Right.
It's like, okay, so it's what you know.
It really is.
Yep.
To each his own. It's like arguing which human language is the best. I mean, yeah, they can all be equally expressive. But I think I like the metric, which is the more you can, assembly language does require more typing.
To get the same job done, you're absolutely doing more typing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Giovanni Darkea in Maryland wonders about the RFID YubiKey. This is the new one. Steve, I just want to let you know Yubico is now making their famous YubiKey with an integrated RFID transmitter. I was wondering what you think the potential security implications could be now that anyone could just wirelessly get your YubiKey passwords. Or if you do think it's safe enough to use, what scenarios do you envision yourself using the RFID YubiKey with? As always, love the show. Please keep recording it for many years to come. Looking forward to CryptoLink. Come on, Steve. Start coding.
I'm glad he reminded me. I did meet with Stina Evansfard about a couple weeks ago. We had some coffee in the morning when she was down here after the annual RSA conference up in San Francisco. And to clarify, this new YubiKey is exactly like the previous YubiKeys, the new generation ones, the ones that have two different modes of operating. Just to remind our listeners, that allows you to have both the original pre-programmed with a secret key that nobody knows, but which will authenticate against Yubico's authentication servers. And you can also have it's like a second channel. You can also touch it differently, and it will generate a whole second channel where you can put a fixed password of your own. You can put also make it a one-time password. They now support the standard oath style authentication, which is the same thing which the VeriSign tokens and other things use. It's less resolution in terms of the digits it's producing, but it's an industry standard, so they've gone that way. So that's the non-RFID version of their current sort of second generation YubiKey. What they did was they have another version for a little more money. I think it's $35, which has all that and a static serial number RFID transponder. The idea was that, well, rather than, in this quest to minimize the so-called necklace of having to have all these separate authentication things, they said, well, look, we'll just put in an RFID transponder. So if something pings us, we'll respond with an RFID standard token, which is fixed. It's not variable. It's always the same. It simply identifies that particular YubiKey out of the world of them and out of the world of other RFID things. There's a registrar that you use, very much like you do with MAC addresses, so you don't have to worry about them having collisions. And so the concept was, if your corporation used RFID like door keys, you could register your YubiKeys RFID ID with your company's door security, in which case you wouldn't have to have a separate RFID dongle to get into the building. You just use your YubiKey, waving it rather than using it in the normal USB mode, which we all know the YubiKey uses. So it's just a cool little additional feature, not much money, and they thought, well, why not toss it in? I mean, in no way, it doesn't interact with the YubiKey functionality. It's just a separate, it's like a third channel that says, this is my ID. Now, if you don't want that, don't use that YubiKey. If you do, if that would be useful to you, they've got that too.
Way to go, Stina. They're amazing.
Yeah.
What a
They're
great
doing
company.
a great job.
Yeah. All right, now we get into some special questions.
Our final three great things.
3 great things. Starting with the great warning of the week. Subject, yes, it matters, from Brian in Raleigh, North Carolina. Steve, in case anyone dismisses your continual warnings of ARP, poisoning, and man-in-the-middle attacks in public spaces as improbable, I'd like to pass along a report from a friend who says he witnessed someone using the EtherCap networking sniffing tool in a local coffee shop this morning. It does happen. It's well worth protecting yourself from it. Thanks for a very informative podcast.
Yeah, it's actually EtherCap.
Oh, EtherCap.
EtterCap.
Okay.
It's hosted over on SourceForge, and the people are proud of what they've created. It's ettercap.sourceforge.net. They're announcing that 0.7.3 is now released, and their short description of EtterCap, which was being used in this coffee shop this morning, it reads, EtterCap is a suite for man-in-the-middle attacks on LAN. It features sniffing of live connections, content filtering on the fly, and many other interesting tricks. It supports active and passive dissection of many protocols, even ciphered ones, and includes many features for network and host analysis. So one of the many things it does, for example, is catch usernames and passwords in email logons and unsecured web logons, like automatically for you. And I don't know that the person wasn't doing anything more advanced than that, but even that, remember that, for the longest time, Gmail logons were not secure unless you deliberately used HTTPS initially in order to connect up to Google. and then you dropped back out of security. And most, I would say today, most standard SMTP and POP logons, where you log on to your server to get your mail, are still being sent over port 110 for POP, and it's not secure. So somebody sitting in a coffee shop running Ettercap may very well be harvesting email logon credentials. I mean, for example, this is exactly how you start the exploit that got Jennifer, Leo. This is how you do it.
Right.
This guy collects these logon credentials. Maybe he's selling them, or maybe he's using them himself. So that allows you to log onto somebody else's POP account and browse through their email, learn about them, and then send email asking for money from the people they know. I mean, this is how it starts. And this was happening in a coffee shop this morning.
Yeah, I mean, it happens all the time. Randall Schwartz used to do that on the cruise ships. He would say, "Is this your password?" He'd come up to people because people were on the Wi-Fi, unencrypted, and he said, "You just sent your password in the clear." And I think, in a way, that's the worst thing.
Making friends wherever he goes.
Randall. Oh, okay. Moving right along to now number 11, which is our great recommendation of the week from Steve Heiner, Between a Keyboard and a Chair in Phoenix, Arizona. Subject, loving the current podcast series. Steve, I'm really enjoying your current Build a Computer series. Thanks for putting it together. The series has been the motivation I need to read a book I've owned for 2 or 3 years, Charles Petzold's book, Code. This is a classic, by the way. The hidden language of computer hardware and software. There are huge parallels with your podcast series, of course, but it really helps to fill in some of the gaps since he has the room to expand on topics and use graphics to help explain things. I'm over 200 pages into the book, and he's finally gotten to the point of being able to talk about opcodes and machine language. 200 pages in. He takes it very slow and explains every little thing in detail. Anyone who is enjoying the Let's Build a Computer series and wants to go a bit deeper should consider picking up this book. I highly recommend it.
I highly recommend it, too. First of all, Charles Petzold is a tremendous technical writer. He is the guy who taught me Windows.
Oh, you're kidding.
It's Charles Petzold's classic book, Programming Windows,
Right.
which was my Bible when I'm coming from DOS, where I owned the whole machine, and all you had was a BIOS, and you could put characters on the screen and read the keyboard, and that was, for example, the environment in which I wrote Spinrite, and that's the environment in which everyone programmed. The original Lotus 123 was a DOS program that ran on the text screen, and so when I sort of thought, oh, looks like this darn Windows thing is going to happen after all. I kept waiting for it to die, but,
No.
it just didn't die. And I thought, and then for a while I would only fire up Windows in order to run Designer, Micrographics Designer, which was like a fantastic graphics drawing tool, but everything else was better still in DOS. And then, then Word kind of happened, and I thought, oh, yeah, I guess I'm going to have to learn this newfangled thing. And so it was Charles Petzold who came to the rescue. And I remember scratching my head. Wow, what's going on here with the Windows? I don't really get it, but he explained it to me. So yes, Code, the hidden language of computer hardware and software. I really like Steve's recommendation. It's a great one for anyone who's enjoying this series. Charles, as Steve says, takes it very slow, and you'll really understand this stuff.
He wrote for PC Magazine? I know that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh, yeah. He wrote for PC Magazine for decades.
Right.
Forever. Yeah. He's
great guy.
He's top notch.
Yep. Question 12. Are we at the end?
We are.
Holy cow.
Huh.
Went fast today. Jack Daniel with a Starro in Wilmington, Massachusetts brings us the brilliant idea of the week. Steve, I heard the question about blocking attacks by IP, and I had a few thoughts. First, given where I'm sitting, if you're running a Starro, you can easily black hole route by IPs or networks. It's also easy to add a route to your computer to misdirect traffic for Windows, something like route add with the bad IP address, mask it with 255 times 4. to a non-existent local IP address, -P will do the trick. Works for, I'll put that in the show notes because it's a command line. Works for networks too. Don't forget the -P. It makes the route change persistent. Then a route print command will show the current routing table to confirm the changes. If you know how to speak router, you know you can do anything, can't you, Steve?
Well, I completely forgot about the routing table that all of us have in Windows. And so I loved Jack's suggestion. It's brilliant.
This is better than hosts then for
well, the hosts won't do it because hosts will only our computer goes to the hosts file when it wants to do a DNS lookup, and we want to prevent it from doing a DNS lookup. Right. So for example, you would tell hosts to go to, you would put an entry in the host file for, say that you wanted to just block all access to doubleclick.net. You'd put doubleclick.net tab and then 127.0.0.1, which is by default the IP of your own machine. And so your computer cannot get the actual IP address of doubleclick.net because it always asks the host file, that's to say it looks in the hosts file first to satisfy any request, and only if it's not there does it go on. But it doesn't look for IP addresses. And so one of our questioners, I guess it was week before last, he was asking, I've got some bad IP addresses. I know they're bad. I've stumbled on them before. They've bitten me before, whatever. I just want to prevent my computer from ever going there. How can I do that? And so I scratched my head and noted that, well, some software firewalls will allow you to block by IP address. Jack comments, first of all, that the Astaro security gateway will offer that facility. And the advantage, of course, of doing it at the gateway is then you're blocking that presumably evil or malicious IP for all machines within your network. So it keeps any traffic from addressed to that IP from heading out past it. It just, black hole is the networking term for doing that. But in our computers is a routing table. And I referred to it indirectly earlier when I was talking about, it was that question about the guy's NAS that was on 192.168, and he switched to a 10. Network and so forth. If you were to open a command window in Windows or in the Mac for that matter, this is something that has existed from the beginning of the Internet in the first Unix machines that were on the Internet, and all OSs, Linux, Unix, Solaris, Windows, you name it, if they're using IP technology, there's a routing table in your local machine. And that's where that decision is made that a packet is addressed to another machine on the local network or not on the local network, meaning route that out to the gateway. So that line that Jack provided is route space add, then an IP that you want to match, then the word mask, and then in this case it would be 255.255.255.255, meaning mask every bit of the IP you're giving it is important. If you wanted to block a whole network, that is the IPs in the range of that bad IP, you might go 255.255.255.0, which would mean that the last byte would sort of be a wildcard byte. It'd be like .star on the end, meaning any of those IPs. Then you give it a non-existent local IP, which could be 127.001 or 192.168.100.100, whatever. And so essentially what that does is that tells your computer, this is sort of underneath a firewall, without needing a firewall of any kind, that tells your computer, as this packet is getting ready to be sent, it says check to see whether it matches what it matches in the routing table. The way the table works, the first match that occurs is the one that takes precedence. So the routing table is ordered so that the most specific matches are earliest, and then the more general ones occur later, so that you always get the more specific match occurring before general ones, and that ends up just sort of working out in terms of routing table dynamics. And the idea would be that it's a simple way of efficiently and cleanly blocking specific IPs that are blocking your computer from sending them out to the gateway. Normally, they would end up matching the last rule in the routing table, which is sort of, if nothing else happened, send it to the gateway. But in this case, it would match that rule, and it would send it to a non-existent IP, making it just disappear. So it would be impossible for your computer to contact that remote IP you're wanting to prevent. And then what's cool is, from the command line, again, you can say route space print. And I mean, you can do it right now. Anyone listening could just open up a DOS box and say route space print, and it'll dump out your current routing table, showing you what the default routing table is. And he makes a point of that because if you do the -P, it will end up making an entry in the registry, which will reinstantiate that route every time your machine boots, which is what you would want if you wanted to keep these things blacklisted, essentially. But you'd have to remember that, you had done that, because it's a very powerful mechanism. And I mean, I could imagine scratching my head for days if someone said to my, brought me to a computer and said, Steve, everything works except I can't go to Google. Nothing I do lets me go to Google. And we'd look in the hosts file and there'd be nothing there. And we'd look and he wouldn't have a firewall. Everything would be fine. And I would maybe I'd think to sniff traffic and go, oh, look what's happening. The packet's going to the twilight zone, and that might lead me back to the routing table. But, I mean, it's a kind of a cool, very stealthy way to make some changes deep in Windows that most people don't even know about or don't even think about.
Yeah.
And it's all built in. It's in there.
It's in there. Wow, these are great questions and some great tips.
I had to stop myself at 12, Leo. I thought, oh, come on.
Well, we whizzed through them, so that's fine.
Yeah.
You can find more about Steve and all of his great software at grc.com, the Gibson Research Corporation. That's where you'll find Spinrite, everybody's favorite hard drive maintenance and recovery utility, but also lots of freebies like Wizmo and Shields Up, which is very famous for testing routers. You can also find 16-kilobit versions of the show there, as well as the full-quality versions, transcriptions, and show notes. It's all at grc.com. If you'd like to ask a question for our next Q&A segment in a couple of episodes, you can go to grc.com/feedback. And, Steve, we will see you next week. Do you know what you're going to talk about yet, or is it going to be a surprise?
Well, I'm glad you asked. We were going to be talking about, we'd been planned to talk about the multiverse, multi-threading, multitasking, multi-core, multi-everything. But we can't.
Why not?
Something has come up.
Oh, my.
And it's always the case that, we will give precedence to things that are important that have come up. It has, and many of our listeners were writing to me about this well after I had learned about it. And so rest assured, I know all about it. I'm not going to do an I told you so, but it turns out there's a problem with so many certificate authorities being trusted by our browsers.
Oh, boy.
There is evidence that some governments have been legally compelling trusted certificate authorities to issue bogus website certificates specifically to allow them to spy.
Oh, dear.
So we need to talk about how this is happening, the mechanisms, how we can detect it, and what to do about it. But if there's an 18-page academic paper that we'll link to next week, and as I'm reading through it, I mean, I could have written part of it, because at one point it says, it's like bemoaning the huge number of authorities which are now trusted certificate authorities in our browsers. And remember, I used to joke about the Hong Kong Post Office.
Yeah.
Not meaning to pick on them, but it's like, why does my browser trust anything they do? And what's significant is that Google may have their certificate signed by VeriSign, but that doesn't prevent any other certificate authority from generating a bogus Google.com certificate for someone else. And that allows the interception of our SSL secured traffic. There is evidence that this is happening. So we're going to talk about that next week.
Terrible.
Yep.
Okay, well, Steve,
aren't you glad you asked?
Yeah. Wow. Well, no, this will be an important episode. You got to make sure you listen next week.
Classic Security Now topic.
Don't miss a one.
And what's so cool is all of our listeners who've been following along understand what I just said.
They're ready.
They're ready.
Prepared. And the rest of you, you got some listening to do. Just go back and listen to the previous 251 episodes. Should be easy. 241 episodes should be easy. Steve, we'll see you next week on Security Now. A reminder, of course, you can get us in video now. Go to iTunes, search for Security Now, or just search for Twit, and you'll find all the Twit shows, including Security Now there. We have high and low quality H.264, not low, but actually large and small is probably a better way to describe it. Suitable for, depending on your device, your computer, your laptop, or your big screen TV, or maybe your phone. We also have YouTube versions at youtube.com/twit. Look in the Security Now channel. That's going to be that way from now on. Once a week, we're adding more shows to the video lineup so you can get the video versions. Thanks, Steve. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Leo.
Security Now.